Welcome to Stayf Draws. I'm Stayf, a Dutch artist, and I'm currently working on a graphic novel series which is called World of Whatif, featuring my character Horus Hippo. And I already made 3 chapters. I'm now working on the 4th chapter, and that's about Mackmeyer, and that is a comic from 1928 that was published in a newspaper. And I really got inspired by old comics a long time ago when I bought this book at Lambiek store in Amsterdam, which is called the Smithsonian Collection of Newspaper Comics, and it's edited by Bill Blackbeard and Martin Williams. And in this video I'm just going to do a review about this book and a longer review about newspaper comics I'm also going to do on my Substack. And you can follow me on stayfdraws.substack.com for more in-depth review of newspaper comics. The Smithsonian Collection of Newspaper Comics was published in 1977 and has 336 pages. It's a collection of the most critically acclaimed American comic strips, from Yellow Kid of 1896 to such admired contemporary works of Peanuts, BC and Doonesbury. In the late 1800s, comic strips exploded in popularity in American newspapers, with the onset of the circulation war between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. This book is divided in 8 chapters. The first chapter shows Sunday pages of R.F. Outcault's Yellow Kid and Buster Brown, Catjammer Kids by Rudolph Dirks, and other comics. It was also the debut of Little Nemo in Slumberland by Winsor McCay, and other obscure comics that are forgotten. It's interesting to see that the first comics all had children as their main character. Chapter 2 shows the beginning of the daily comics, starting in 1907 with A Mutt by Bud Fisher. First they were illustrations with text, but soon the text was replaced by comic balloons. George Harriman first made a comic strip, The Family Upstairs, with a small strip of the early Crazy Cat. Another comic Harriman made was Baron Bean. Chapter 3 is dedicated to Sunday pages of comics that stood the test of time. From 1916 until 1936, the comic section of the newspaper expanded, from 4 to 8, then to 16 pages. This was the decade that the Sunday comics were full page. The style also changed. It was more streamlined, as you can see in the pages of Polly and Her Pals by Cliff Sterrett. The pages also reflected the avant-garde style, as you can see in these amazing pages. At the same time, Crazy Cat also had some amazing graphical pages. It was a bit too experimental for the readers, and they had to tone it down. Little Nemo in Slumberland was changed to Little Nemo in the Land of Wonderful Dreams because Winsor McCay got a contract with William Hearst to publish it in the newspaper New York American. This chapter also shows wonderful Sundays of Bringing Up Father, the Catjammer Kids, Barney Google and Spark Plug, and the amazing art of Frank King for Gasoline Alley. Just look at this Sunday page that seems to be drawn with a woodcut style of German Expressionism. Not all of the Sundays were printed in color. Booby McNutt, Happy Hooligan, Merrily Margie and the Bungle Family were all printed in black and white. Crazy Cat was William Hearst's favorite comic, although many of the readers were puzzled by the strange storylines. Hearst insisted to his editors to keep running the Sundays, but in the weekly drama and art section. From 1916 until 1934, all of the Crazy Cat Sundays were printed in black and white. Chapter 4 is dedicated to the adventure stories. The daily comic strips slowly moved into a more suspenseful era. Strips like Bobby Thatcher, Minute Movies, School Days had a more serious storyline. Tooneville Folks by Fontaine Fox was a comedic strip which reflected the movies of W.C. Fields and Laurel and Hardy. Tooneville was also adapted in 3 short animations in 1936 by the Van Buren Studios. Moon Mullins and Barnaby Google were 2 of the great daily narrative strips of the 1920s and 1930s. Washtubs by Rob Grain had become the greatest adventure strip of the 1920s. Chapter 5 is about adventure, crime and comedy storylines in the Sunday comic pages after 1920. The mix was so apparent in the daily strips, but a new narrative genre entered the serious comic strips, science fiction, with Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. Prince Valiant, Alley Oop and Captain Easy were based on history. Thimble Theater by Seagar was the comic strip which featured Popeye, Olive and Wimpy. In the Sundays there was another comic by Seagar called Sappo. It was a so-called topper. The toppers were a part of the Sunday comics and were on top of the main comic. In a comic from 1934, the last panel of the comic was dedicated to a funny film section, where you could cut out a sequence and slide it through the slits. An early interactive comic. Chapter 6 concentrates on the extended narrative in the daily and Sunday comics from 1928 until 1943. Most of the strips had an ongoing narrative. Comic strips with a daily gag were an exception. In Barnaby, illustrator Crockett Johnson brought a memorable whimsical fantasy to the comic pages, about a boy and his fairy godfather. The strip appealed to children and adults. Barnaby was drawn in a modern and graphical style. What strikes me the most is that many comics were based around families and their discomforts. The entire story of Mickey Mouse Race for Riches by Floyd Gottfredson is published in this chapter. You can also read it in Volume 3 of Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse from 2012. The daily comics and the Sundays of Little Orphan Annie, Terry and the Pirates and Dick Tracy now had a linked narrative. Most of the time the storylines of gags for dailies and the Sunday pages were separate. Chapter 7 shows comics with cats, dogs, possums, counts and others. In the 20s and 30s the Sunday comics were shown on the entire page, like Felix the Cat, Little Abner, and Crazy Cat, and Pogo. But after 1948, the Sunday pages were cut in half. The final chapter of the book is dedicated to new comics, at least by the time this book was published in 1977. It's a collection of comics that begins with the Immaculate Peanuts comic by Charles Schulz. Before, most strips were based around a family with kids. Schulz turned it around and based his comics around children. The size of the comics had shrunk to a minimum. The name Peanuts refers to the size of the comic it was published in. Suffering the most were the Sundays. They were now a quarter of a page. There are samples of King Arno, Tumbleweeds, Beetle Bailey, Hagar the Horrible, Doonesbury, BC, The Wizard of Id, Hi and Lois, Mama, Broomhilda, and Sam Strip. Because of the size limit, the balloons got bigger. There was lesser text and the daily gag returned to the comics, most of the time told in 3 panels. The editors end the book with a bit of bitterness of all of the wonderful comics that came before. One of the editors of this book, Bill Blackbeard, was a writer-editor and the co-founder director to the San Francisco Academy of Comic Art. You see his name pop up in almost any publication of older comic strips. From a young age he started collecting newspapers, finding that libraries were discarding bound newspapers after microfilming. Blackbeard established the San Francisco Academy of Comic Art in 1968 and began collecting newspapers from Californian libraries, expanding his scope to institutions nationwide. He later sold his entire collection to Ohio State. The collection is now part of the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum in Ohio. I hope you enjoyed this review, and you can also read about it on my Substack, which is stayfdrawls.substack.com, and I'll leave a link below this video. I also have a Substack for Horus Hippo and the graphic novel series World of Whatif, and that's horushippo.substack.com, and there you can read all of the pages of the graphic novel series World of Whatif. And I also compiled them in the first volume, which is Horus Hippo Returns, and that's available on Amazon, but I'm also publishing it per chapter on Apple Books, and I also leave links below this video. There are 3 chapters, so the first chapter is Horus Hippo of the Silver Screen, the second chapter is Horus Hippo and the Retroflash, and the third chapter that's just out now is Horus Hippo and the Classics, and I'm now working on the 4th chapter. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, because each time I upload a new video, you get a notification. Drawing is fun, and practice makes perfect. See you next time. Doodles!